Yeah.
Over. Keep waving. Waving now. Can you see me? It was a good climb up. Didn't take us nearly as long as expected.
I think the whole thing started off when somebody told a story at a mountaineering club dinner about his experience. And then in the wartime there was it was in the wartime, a mountaineer, a soldier, was camping in the Cairngorms, complete with revolver apparently. And he panicked about something, whether real or imaginary. And he had emptied his revolver into this, whatever it was, and he ran like mad away from it.
I remember walking along, it was actually on the top of Ben MacDhui one day, convinced I could hear footsteps behind me, as other people have related the same kind of story. And I thought about this for a while, and of course every time I stopped the noise disappeared. And I would set off walking again, and again I would hear the noise which sounded just like footsteps behind me. So I decided to stop and think about this, and while I did so I took off my rucksack and decided to have a cup of coffee.
I was returning from the cairn on the summit in a mist, when I began to think I heard something else than merely the noise of my own footsteps. Every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, and then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. I said to myself, this is all nonsense. I listened, and heard it again, but could see nothing in the mist. As I walked on, and the eerie crunch sounded behind me, I was seized with terror and took to my heels, staggering blindly among the boulders for 4 or 5 miles, nearly down to Rothiemurchus Forest. Whatever you make of it, I do not know. But there is something very queer about the top of Ben MacDhui, and I will not go back there again myself, I know.
I'd read stories about the Grey Man of Ben MacDhui when I read books on the Scottish mountains and the Cairngorms before I came to live and work here in 1995.
You've got to go back to locality. It's the Grey Man of Ben MacDhui. That's where you would have to go. But you read into it, and I don't know, try and recreate the weather conditions, the mist and the stillness, as much as you possibly could, and see what happened.
Cairngorms is a very special place. To a lot of people, the mountains aren't immediately as dramatic as, say, some of those in the west coast. The Cairngorms, the granite structure, these very rounded tops. But in a way, that's what makes them so unique, so special. It's one of the wildest remote places we have left in Britain.
Most of the hills are rounded. They're very old hills. They've got flattened off during the years, and they're pretty featureless, which makes it additionally very easy to get lost because it's difficult to find an accurate bearing.
I do know that the mist can magnify objects, and it can also amplify sound in certain circumstances.
It would be very easy to panic, and once you lose control of what you're doing, once you've panicked, then it builds. And you could run over the edge of a cliff if you really got in a state. And well, the Lurcher's Crag, it's not a sheer drop, but you could run over the edge.
We often send people down towards Lurcher's Crag if they're lost on the Cairngorm Plateau. There was one incident which was in July 2004 when we got a phone call from the police saying that a call had come from the hill that a chap was lost on the hill and his companion collapsed, and he didn't know where his companion was, but he collapsed near a track somewhere on the Cairngorm Plateau. He himself had gone off to get help, and in the process of doing that had got lost because the weather was poor. And they were somewhere apparently near Ben MacDhui. The young lad was certainly very frightened when I met him at the car park. Well, no question that he was very frightened. He was acting in a really strange manner. But he'd never been in the hills before. He'd never camped at that height before in the hills, and it was a stormy night, and in a tent with the wind battering against the tent. If the wind blows your tent down and you're at 4,000 feet in June or July, it can be freezing, and it can be very, very frightening. And it wasn't until 2 months later that we heard that they said that they had been on the summit of Ben MacDhui looking for the old grey man. And they made this story up, which was in the press, that they had actually been attacked by the great grey man of Ben MacDhui, and that they had trashed the tents. And the Daily Mail, in their wisdom, thought they would check it for paw marks and DNA. This is without a word of a lie.
I must have been aware of the story about very nearly 50 years ago, and being a young and impressionable boy, I was quite convinced it was a monstrous grey creature shuffling about the mountains. I've been lucky enough to see the spectre of the Brocken once when I was in the hills.
I've seen Brocken Spectre on a number of occasions, in the Cairngorms and in lots of other mountain ranges too, and it really is quite eerie and quite amazing. And I suppose that's what influences my sort of ideas of what the Grey Man of Ben MacDhui may be like, just some kind of presence like that.
So what you're effectively looking at is your own shadow cast onto the cloud or onto any sort of mist that's there with the sun behind you. And if the sun is a very low angle, which in winter it often is, or in Scotland, at the either end of the day you get the sun at a very low angle, so it casts a very long shadow, so it can be quite a large shadow at times. And also the other effect of a Brocken Spectre is you have this halo effect. You get this coloured ring around the shadow.
When I reached Karua, I was soaked through, and as the weather showed no inclination to improve, I decided to stay. That night, as I dozed in front of the fire, the inner door was closed, but the outer one was wide open. Suddenly, I heard it close. Curious, I went to investigate and found the door tightly barred. The only means of getting out was by squeezing through the small, hinged window. I said to myself, "MacDhui," having come to the simple conclusion that a sudden gust of wind had slammed the door. But I still cannot explain today my action in re-entering the bothy by the window. The only possible explanation I can give is that it was prompted by some unrecognised, primitive fear.
Carrower Bothy, which is up in the Larry Grue, quite close to Ben MacDhui, is often probably a starting off point for many people who send MacDhui from the Larry Grue via the Taylor Burn. Carrower has been in existence quite a lot of years, since the early 20th century. Part of the irony of Carrower is it was originally a watcher's hut where the laird's man would have been sent to actually keep people away so they didn't disturb the deer. And now, of course, it's a haven for many people who come to enjoy the Cairngorms, so there's an interesting irony there.
I used to camp a lot in the Cairngorms and Ben MacDhui, and I've been here during the night and during the day, and I've camped in summer and winter. But no, I've never had any sort of experience myself. Maybe I'm just not receptive enough.
And it was only when I took the flask out of the rucksack that I realised what the noise was. And it was the half-full flask full of coffee that was sloshing around inside the back of my rucksack, which sounded exactly like footsteps behind me.
I remember he said he thought, well, if there was something there, then since then the tourists had scared them away.
Dead easy. There was just one wee steep bit, but any icy patches on the paths we can just step round, so we don't even need to put the crampons on. It was good. We're really rewarded with the stunning views now. The top was in cloud all the way up, but we got it fine just now. Okay, you're gonna head down and I'll... See you soon.